Welcome to the webinar, Staying Ahead of Network Compliance with CMMC, which is a mouthful, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. I am Don McLean, and I'm joining you, as I'm sure you know, from my home due to the current situation. And of course, I've had my walls painted with the logos of my company, DLT and NetBrain, as you can see behind me. I'm joined today here by my colleagues at NetBrain, Paul McCloskey and Matt Sherman. And just to give you an idea of my background, I am Chief Cybersecurity Technologist at DLT. And in that capacity, I do events such as this, speaking engagements, and try to present DLT as a thought leader in the cybersecurity space in general, and in particular with CMMC. Prior to coming to DLT, I worked for most of my career for BAE Systems and spent a lot of time managing cybersecurity contracts for federal customers, mostly federal civilian agencies, U.S. Department of Justice, FAA, Department of Labor, and various other agencies. And I dipped my toe into the DoD world a little bit, but not too much. So I like to think that I've been up close and personal with cybersecurity programs in the federal government. And with that, I will let Paul, my colleague at NetBrain, introduce himself. Paul.
Thanks, Don. My name is Paul McCloskey. I am the Vice President of Federal Sales here at NetBrain. I've been here for just over a year now. Prior to my tenure here at NetBrain, I was with SolarWinds Federal for just under 8 years. I could go through my entire resume. I'll just let you know that it started before my IT sales to the government started, before email was invented. So that gives you an idea of my experience in the business.
Wow, I don't remember those days. What were they like? Joyful, because you didn't have to answer anything. So anyway, so thanks, Paul. So Paul, NetBrain, I know, has been talking to a lot of different defense contractors about their CMMC readiness. You know, how ready are they to go into this take the plunge? What do you think? What is your main takeaway? What's the main message you're getting from those contractors about CMMC readiness?
Sure. Don, that's a great question. We've spent a ton of time just discussing the impact that CMMC has had on individual defense contractors, their business, their operations, both large and small from the size of a company perspective. And all of these discussions seems to take on a similar pattern. We go from a very high level ease to angst. And what do I mean by that? When we talk about CMMC at a very high level, in terms of, yeah, what are you thinking? They'll say we've created a task force, there's a team to address it, we understand it's imminent, it's important, all of these things. But as we start really delving down into specific plans and details where the rubber meets the road, there's a definitive change in body language. And particularly when the conversation really starts to focus on readiness. A lot of anxiety starts to come to the surface. It's not unique or unusual. It's completely understandable. There's the convergence of three things, right? And these three things can happen in any walk of life. It's the mix of something that's very, very important. Some of these businesses have their entire revenue stream built on serving the federal government, particularly DoD. So it's important. It's the first time that they're doing something new, which creates a little angst and uncertainty. And then it's the amount of uncertainty. How are we going to get this done? So we get it, and that's mostly what we hear.
Sure. So just so everyone knows, we're going to have a little bit of audience participation in today's webinar, and just to help you have a little fun and participate a little bit more. And so what we're going to do is, rather than me ask Paul questions all the time, we're going to pose a question to the audience, and specifically, and you'll be able to click on your responses. Where would you rate your organization in terms of CMMC readiness? We'll just give you a minute or two to click on your answers, and we'll give some time, and then we'll take a look at the results. Meanwhile, I should maybe sing, play guitar, do some other quarantine-related activity, right? Oh, there we go. We're seeing some results now. Aha, coming up to speed. It's like a horse race. It's right now neck and neck between coming up to speed on requirements and still evaluating and planning to move forward. So it's 2 and 2. nobody seems to be very ready, and no one has a plan in place ready to execute. Well, that's no
Well, Don, if they were very ready, would they be on this webinar right now?
There you go, talking sense again, Paul. Didn't I tell you not to do that? All right. We'll tell you what. Let's close down it does look like, as you said, if people were really ready, they would be on the webinar. But still, I mean, globally throughout the industry, I think it's clear that there's a lot of anxiety, as you said, around how to get ready for the CMMC requirement that's coming up. The first version of the standards has been published, though, and it's still unclear how the assessment itself will take place, or even what companies are going to do the assessments. So Paul, I mean, how can a company actually prepare for an audit? What can they do to start getting ready in the face of that uncertainty that you mentioned just now?
Yeah, I think you just treat this like any other project. You're going to need a plan. It's going to have some milestones. And we would suggest that you put it in some consumable pieces. And we would start with whatever your organization domain strengths are. And when we talk about domain as it relates to CMMC, it's one of those 17 compartmentalized subject areas like access control, asset management, recovery, et cetera. There are 171 practice areas across these domains, and for each one, you're going to have to perform a task or a function, document how you did the function, create a plan to manage it going forward. You're going to have to review the effectiveness of the plan, and then optimize the plan across the entire organization. So I know that in the several organizations I've worked for in the past, some were better at some things than others, and we would just suggest that you pick something that you're relatively good at. For instance, if you do a particularly good job on incident response, maybe you start there. And what do we mean by a good job? Well, you do it with relative ease right now, meaning you can document how you do it without having to put a whole lot of thought into it. You can create and manage a plan to it. You can systematically review and measure the effectiveness of the plan. And you've probably already rolled it out to the rest of the organization or institution. So, if you think about incident response, I would imagine those organizations that already have an ITSM solution like Remedy or ServiceNow are probably in pretty good shape with that one. So, that's how we think about it.
Okay. So, I mean, one of the problems that I hear from a lot of government officials in security, and even just in IT in general, is that, the problems they face are really what I call foundational problems. These are simple foundational issues. And one of the biggest issues is just device inventory, just knowing what's on the network and what they have. And of course, this plays in a pretty significant role in security, because it's pretty hard to secure something if you don't know you have it. Just to give an example, there's one agency that deals with healthcare. The CISO told me that they have 220,000 makes and models of medical devices. That's not individual instances of devices, that's makes and models. And could only speculate as to how many millions of actual instances. So, device inventory is a big issue. So what are your thoughts on how, on device inventory?
My first thought is I'm really glad I'm not the one that has to do it. This is really, I mean, it would seem simple, but it's really, really hard stuff. I mean, it's one thing for you and I, Don. We might have our router to our ISP in our home office and maybe an access point or two, so we actually know what we have. But when you start talking about having a couple hundred, a couple of thousand, tens of thousands devices, not all in the same place, stretching across the globe, that becomes to be a real difficult task. To get under your belt, especially since it's so fluid. People are adding devices, organizations are adding and deleting devices all the time, in some cases, almost every single day. I will say to the folks on the phone that for as long as I've been selling IT solutions, particularly networking solutions, to the federal government, I've never sat in anyone's office and asked them how they were doing on their asset inventory and have someone respond, "Oh, it's great. We've got everything under control. We know exactly where everything is. We know how it's configured, and we're all set." Yeah. So we never come across that. But at the end of the day, your inventory is only as good as your record keeping. And trying to do it manually, right? Manually tracking device inventory is time consuming. It's prone to errors, and like I said before, it's very difficult to keep up with the changes in the environment, whether it be a move of a device or a software change.
Yeah. I actually did sit down with a customer once who said that their device inventory was completely under control, as you described. And when they were done, they went, not so.
Right.
Audience participation time again. We're going to have a poll question. How would you rate the accuracy and timeliness of your organization's asset inventory? Those polysyllables are tough for me, but I'll try. In other words, there we go. needs improvement so far. Yep. Needs improvement too. All right. Let's give a few more seconds for the results to come in, for the answers to appear on the screen. So far, everyone is saying needs improvement. All right. So yeah. So I think our experience, Paul, matches up pretty well with what we're seeing in the poll results. Is that it's difficult to do that. It's difficult to get your arms around your actual physical devices, and of course, without that, you can't really do much about securing those devices. Another issue that I encountered myself a lot in doing my security work for the federal government back in the day was the whole issue of compliance. I found it to be a time-consuming, labor-intensive requirement, and I'm wondering if how much you encounter that problem, and what can a government agency do to reduce the compliance and documentation issue, and is there a way to automate that process?
Yeah, I guess, Don, the way we think about it is it even possible to do it without automation? I mean, because now we're talking about, so if just doing asset inventory is difficult, right, and the challenges that are faced there, this is going to be exponentially harder to do, because now that you understand where the device is, now you have to understand how it's configured, and is it configured in such a way that's acceptable to CMMC, DISA-STIGs, whatever compliance yardstick or ruler that you're trying to measure it against, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about how it's done today, if you're going to do it manually, you're going to have to log on to these layer 2, layer 3 devices one by one through SSH and validate 400 plus potential configuration setting times the number of devices that you have. If you're talking a couple of 10 devices, 20, 30, 40 devices, maybe that's okay to do it manually. But a lot of these organizations have tens of thousands of people and tens of thousands of devices in some cases, and it's almost possible to do without automation. One of the things that we look for at NetBrain to help people out in terms of establishing value, right, and return on investment is we wrestle with, or we don't wrestle with, we pose the question. And in fact, I'm taking this off one that we just came across this week. We're dealing with a purple agency who's got 300 plus minus L2 and L3 devices. And this is their data, they make 12 changes a day. Every single change, 100% of the changes require documentation. The average time to document each change is 2 hours. We look at this on an annual basis, it's 5,640 hours a year that they spend just documenting changes to the network.
You do the math and you're oriented toward numbers, but for those of people like me that might be a little bit math challenged, what that adds up to, in my mind, is too much work. This will, I think, be our last poll question to the audience. So how would you rate your organization's awareness? Sorry, I jumped ahead. My bad. I do remember also one agency where I worked. Another issue that came up a lot was the whole issue of trying to track where the data is going. We were, trying to diagram the network, and more importantly, where data went between devices in the network and how it affected their business. So in fact, one agency where I worked, I very carefully tracked all the data, talked to all these system owners, looked at all the memoranda of agreement and understanding between systems that shared data, and determined that the data was going around in a circle. And I was absolutely certain that I had made a mistake and that couldn't be the case. But then after due diligence, I found that seemed really to be true, brought it to the attention of the organization, and they said, you know what, that really is the case. So again, it's like the device inventory. It's very difficult to get your arms around the whole data flow picture. So, I mean, how can you, how can an agency determine or automate or gain better insight into, that whole data flow issue?
Yeah, that's one of the more tough challenges that some of these agencies face, right? It's a real challenge to know how traffic flows through your network, and there are very few tools that are available to do it. I mean, you can do NetFlow. NetFlow is capable of determining flow paths taken through the network, but only at layer 3, and most products don't have the capability to stitch the flows received from each network reporting to a device to identify the paths that were taken. And this problem gets, it intensifies the more traffic flows you have, and then when you introduce cloud, the less visibility that folks are going to have on their legacy network. So, we look for agencies, and we recommend that agencies look to purpose-built products to handle this task if they want to do it with any kind of consistency or relative ease.
All right. So now, I jumped the gun earlier. My apologies for that. I am human. Now it really is time for our audience question, which is, how would you rate your organization's awareness of its networks and network paths, network traffic, where it goes, where it's coming from, how data is shared, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll look at the horse race statistics as they come in. So far, needs improvement is the winner, so to speak. Yep, that's 2, 3. Yep. Oh, 1. Somebody said it's acceptable. That's great. Okay, well, it looks like it's 3-1. We do have one person who's knows where their data is going. That's fantastic. I have seen, though, that this issue that we've just addressing, this whole data flow issue, is exacerbated still further by cloud adoption as well. So, Paul, one more question for you. What are the main challenges that you see DoD contractors encountering as they implement and prepare for the CMMC requirement?
Yeah, I guess the first thing is that folks are coming to the realization that there's no silver bullet to this problem or this challenge, right? And the challenge comes in different shapes and sizes. Meeting the requirements of CMMC takes the integration of multiple solutions, compliant platforms, encrypted assets, data backups, monitoring and management solutions. All of these things need to work together to eliminate your cyber vulnerabilities. So, if you believe that CMMC is here to stay, it is best to treat it as a long-term play. So trying to address everything manually as a one-off is extremely short-sighted. So we suggest that you automate what you can and build a repeatable plan around automation that can be duplicated across the organization. We feel by doing this, you'll save countless hours, headaches, and frustration.
I think CMMC is definitely for real for DoD contractors, and although it's far from being official, I have heard some talk about making it a requirement for Fed Civ as well across the board. So this could be especially important for all contractors, not just DoD, although obviously DoD is the main event right now. So I think what I'd like to do now is to bring Matt Sherman to the stage. And Matt, if you could introduce yourself and then maybe show us around a little bit on some of the capabilities that NetBrain has to offer, that would be really great.
Sure. Thanks, Don. Yeah, so this is Matt Sherman. I'm a federal sales engineer here at NetBrain. Prior to NetBrain, I spent a number of years within Verizon Federal, and so I kind of got some background experience on that certification and accreditation activities, with various customers that engaged Verizon's security arm to do CNAs for them. So, in my experience, that was back in the day when there wasn't any use of automation to do that, and I'm hoping to show you here with this demonstration how automation can really, really speed up that process and make it much more efficient. Give me 1 second here. I'm just going to share my screen. All right. So, to begin with, any kind of compliance verification activity is going to have to begin with knowing, what you have out there. So, being able to, automatically discover, the devices you have and how they're interconnected is really where NetBrain provides a lot of value. So, the initial kind of integration with NetBrain into your environment is to, set up the credentials that NetBrain will need to access the devices. So your SSH logins, your SNMP strings, and then once you've, actually configured that, there's a number of different ways we can kick off that discovery. We can import a list of IP addresses, we can scan different ranges of subnets, or we can use this seed device method where NetBrain is going to first do an SNMP query on this device, and then once it knows the platform type, it will log into the device and pull the related configurations for that device. And really what it's looking for with this step is it's looking for neighbor-related information. So CDP, LLDP neighbors, route table neighbors, ARP and MAC address tables. It's putting all that information together to determine, what devices are connected to this initial device. So then there's a discovery depth that we have. And so once NetBrain, discovers the neighbors from the initial seed device, it's going to hop to those neighbor devices and repeat the same process. And it's going to do that 29 hops deep from that initial seed device. So this is a very rapid process. So we're able to discover about 3,000 devices per hour. And this isn't just a one-time process either. So, once these devices are discovered, NetBrain's going to continually do that process of rediscovery. So, typically once a day, it's going to repeat this process for all the devices it's already aware of, trying to find their new neighbors, trying to find, new devices. And it will alert you as these new devices are brought online. And it will also alert you, when, previously discovered devices failed to be rediscovered. So once that information has been ingested into NetBrain, then you can start, building out your various, site topologies. So because NetBrain has all the information about the platform as well as all the configurations, you can really do a search on any kind of variable. So, to start with, I'll just show, looking at, a subnet, for instance. It's going to find all the devices that have interfaces within that subnet. You can do configuration string searches. So now I'm searching for all devices that have this, insecure UDP small servers setting configured on them. The last example I'll give you is like a host name search. So I want to bring up, all the devices in my San Francisco location that have host names prefixed with SF. So from here, I could choose to, map all these devices at once, or I could, specify devices of interest. So I'm going to start with a single device just to show you how NetBrain builds out this mapping process. So as part of that discovery process, NetBrain has, assembled all the different neighbor relationships for the devices. So as you can see here, it's showing me, that it's aware of V4, V6, layer 2, physical connections to this device. And so I'm going to choose to, map out all these different devices at once on the V4 neighbor relationship. And so you can see how quickly NetBrain can put together a map of devices. So anybody that is familiar with, creating manual Visio diagrams, it's a very time-consuming and arduous process. So typically, you're looking at a starting device configuration, and then comparing that configuration against other configurations, trying to map, the IP address assignments on the devices or the descriptions on the interfaces to, try to really figure out, how these devices are connected. Sometimes you're even going into a wiring closet or a data center to, physically map out, the port connections. This can take a long time. And, when you've finished a single site and move on to the next site, that site diagram that you just finished is typically more than likely out of date because, changes have occurred since then, IP address changes, configuration changes. And so you're constantly fighting a losing battle trying to, keep that mapping and documentation up to date. So,
yeah, Matt, so just to jump in for a second, I just have one question. Where were you when I needed you and I was doing all this kind of work that you're talking about, Manuel? I would have loved to have had this tool back when I was doing this kind of thing. So,
yeah, you bring up a good point. I have the same experience. So when I was at Verizon, we had, one example was we had a relatively small network. It was a satellite network that, had the earth stations, 4 different earth stations connected via MPLS. Each site just had a couple of routers, couple switches, but, we required this information up front to, actually start the CNA activities. So it actually took them a couple of months to get us the diagramming, the inventory information, the configuration files, all those things before we could even start, the actually analyzing and providing feedback for the CNA. Once you've created your different map topologies, you can then export this data directly to Visio, or you can export it to Word. So when you export it to Word, it's going to provide all the information, all the views that were provided on that particular diagram. It's going to embed a Visio within the Word document itself. It's going to embed the configuration files as well as all the asset information for these particular devices. So you can quickly, pull the large amounts of data together without having to, manually assemble all this documentation. And then you can customize the results for, whoever is asking for particular information just by, applying different views on protocols and configurations that are resident on these devices. So because NetBrain is pulling all this data about your device inventory, it's also creating an extensive asset inventory, of all your different devices. So it's showing you, your device platform type, your software version, your serial numbers. We're able to go down to the modular level as well. So we're able to break down, all the different modules that are available on these devices. And then we can customize the data. Because we have all that configuration data, we can include configuration data or performance data in customized inventory reports. We can export our inventory to third-party CMDBs. We can also import, variables of interest from third-party CMDBs. We can import data from third-party platforms as well. So, we have customers that integrate with the Cisco CNTC, where, one of their requirements is to keep up to date on, the end of life for different platforms, the end of support, for the different maintenance agreements. We can ingest that all into our inventory database too and provide alerts to keep them ahead of, those scenarios as well. Now, expanding on that, that inventory front, we're also, collecting all the information about the addressing that's being used on the devices. So, the IP addresses, the related MAC addresses, what interfaces they're assigned to the devices. Through MAC address table verification, we're determining all the hosts that are connected to, the various switch ports. We can identify, what switch port those different IP addresses are connected to. So these two capabilities here, the asset inventory and the IP tables, are two big requirements within CMMC. You need to keep your inventory up to date and account for changes in the inventory, like software changes. And you also need to break down, the subnetting that's being used, and ensure that the proper subnetting is being used at the different network boundaries within your environment. Now, the big one is going to be, compliance. As far as how difficult it is to verify compliance and maintain compliance. So if you look at, an example of a configuration file, there's going to be, over all those various controls that the CMMC specifies, there's going to be things that you need to verify are configured on the device, and also things you want to verify that aren't configured on the device. So I've kind of highlighted the ones that should be in green, the ones that shouldn't be in red. And then, as you look at, an overall configuration, and this is just a really small configuration, so you can see how many lines you just have to scan over to see, to verify, things are in place or things aren't in place that shouldn't be in place. So, that from a manual standpoint really is untenable for a network of any real size. As somebody mentioned earlier, anything over like 10 devices, this is going to be impossible to do on a manual basis without some sort of automation. So that's where, NetBrain is, with its capabilities to parse out, the different configurations that are on these devices, we can create customized rules that do the verification for you. So, the first example here, we're just showing, some, commonly identified protocols that should never be enabled on these devices. So NetBrain is going through the configurations on these devices and highlighting the ones that have these particular protocols or configurations in place. We're creating alerts, customized alerts that tie specifically to the CMMC practice number, where these devices are out of compliance with, and these alerts are then emailed as NetBrain does its scans of the devices. So the example here I'm showing is just kind of on an ad hoc basis where we're able to apply these views to a particular map to see what devices are out of compliance, but these verifications can be run on a daily basis so that NetBrain is doing these verifications across the inventory, not just on a single map, and then providing alerting to when these devices are out of compliance. So that's going to not only keep you compliant from the first verification, but it's going to continually keep you compliant, as well as making sure that new devices that come online have the compliant configurations in place as well. So, but just another example of another verification that we do. CMMC has a requirement that customer networks maintain the proper crypto protocols. One of those being PKI. So we do this verification to make sure that the trust points that are being used are ones that are compliant within the organization, are approved trust points, And a secondary function is verifying that, these certificates are not expiring anytime soon. So the PKI certificate expiration, often causes outages within the network. And by doing these, reports and alerts, we're able to tell customers in advance before, any of those certificates expire, so they can, refresh them, prior to them expiring. So from a flow standpoint, knowing how the traffic is traversing your network between, specified hosts within your network, we have what we call our A2B Path Mapping capability. So this allows you to specify a source and a destination. You can specify UDP or TCP ports. You can specify QoS settings, things like that. And NetBrain is going to determine, by accessing each of these devices along the way, it's going to determine exactly how that traffic is going to be handled by the different devices. So if I look at what's happening on the map here, it's doing a source to destination and a return path for this particular path mapping, and it's showing me along the way, if any routers, switches, firewalls have access lists, whether they're permitting or denying that traffic. So without even having to send any live traffic, you're able to, verify your configuration settings to ensure that, either you're permitting or denying that particular traffic. From a security standpoint, that's important, but an added capability that we have is, integration with third-party tools to trigger, the mapping of these source to destination traffic paths. So, a common integration that NetBrain sees with our platform is, with Splunk. So Splunk can be configured to create a trigger based on, security-related logs. So you could create a trigger for, say, traffic was denied via a certain access list. That trigger would then create an engagement through NetBrain, where NetBrain would build the path between the source and destination host and run, whatever customized verifications you want. So it's effectively providing a snapshot of exactly what was happening at the time of that trigger. It can pull logs from the routers and things like that through these customized verifications. So we expand on that capability as well through our application assurance. So what this does is allows you to, specify specific source and destinations that you want to verify, how those paths are performing, on a continual basis. So NetBrain is going to do a analysis on the path every day to see, are they actually performing the way they should? Are they following the exact path that they're supposed to follow? And if any of those paths fail, NetBrain will, provide alerts to say that the path failed. On the reverse side, you also may have paths that you want to fail. So you want paths that, show that, a particular set of hosts should not be able to access certain resources. Now, if those hosts all of a sudden have a path that is successful, where they are able to get through, say, the firewall, that could be an indication that, that particular device or that particular firewall was misconfigured to allow traffic that it really shouldn't allow. And then finally, because we're able to, determine, when devices are out of compliance, we also have the capability of then remediating those devices by making, configuration changes that bring them online with their, intended compliance configuration. So through our network change module, we can create changes for these devices. So I'm going to call this remediation. And then there's a whole planning and approval process. So, I can load some pre-existing templates for common, configuration changes or specific configuration changes to, bring these devices into compliance. And then I submit that for approval. So NetBrain has, role-based access control where, we have various levels of approval for the different change management processes. So we have, the initiator, the executor, and the approver. And so, it goes through a regimented process to make sure all of these changes are accounted for. You can specify the approval process to go, specifically through the NetBrain product, or you can specify that the approval process go through a third-party ITSM platform like ServiceNow or Remedy, something of that nature, and then increase that auditability log. So once that's approved, we can then specify, that do verification checks before and after, of the configuration file, or you can add specific commands, then you execute, then you do those same verifications afterwards, and then you compare the results.
And Matt, this is great. I'm thinking here of the example that Paul gave earlier, where there were 12 changes a day on lots and lots of devices, and that there just weren't enough hours in the day to document and to go through all the approvals. I'm just thinking how readily applicable this solution would be to that problem. So this is great. Thanks.
Thank you. So the last piece of this change management capability is we also have the ability of integrating with Ansible. So a lot of organizations are using Ansible, and as you may or may not be aware, there's kind of a free version, and then there's Ansible Tower. From all responses that I've received from customers, the Ansible Tower is incredibly expensive. And really what you're getting with Ansible Tower is the auditing and the role-based access control. Not really additional features with Ansible itself. By integrating Ansible with our change management, you're able to, get the benefits of Ansible Tower without the hefty price tag that's associated with it. So, in summary, with having NetBrain automation, it's going to allow you to quickly discover your devices, quickly discover, all their interconnections, all their compliance issues, all the things that would take months and months of work without automation. And, and without automation, the heavy, chances of having, errors due to, just human interaction, not being able to, capture all the different events. And then NetBrain's going to continually, rediscover your network, rescan your network for, vulnerabilities, so that you don't have to worry that even though you once verified that your network was compliant, that, it may have drifted out of compliance since that, CNA activity. And then finally, we have then the ability then to remediate the changes and provide an audit log, of what's been done, so that, everyone can, confirm, your status in being compliant with the CMMC. So thanks everyone for giving me the time to demonstrate that. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Don and Paul.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. I mean, yeah, as I said, I would have loved to have had this capability when I was trying to do all of the things that we talked about earlier, identify, data flows, come up with a reliable and up-to-date device inventory, and to relate all of those issues to, the real goal, which is to make sure that these systems were compliant with the requirements that I had to deal with, which were mostly 800-53 requirements, but also sometimes included other regimes as well. So, Paul, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on what we just saw from Matt?
Yeah, so if you think about the practice areas that CMMC delves into, there's 171 specific practice areas. 60% of those are network related. And if you're able to take a tool like NetBrain, right, be able to automate the performance of that task, have it self-documenting, build a plan how you're going to do it on an ongoing basis, right, be able to review the results, which you can do within a product like NetBrain, and then be able to institutionalize it. Wow, I mean, you've just knocked out 60% of your CMMC requirement, and you've done it all through automation. So we look forward to hearing folks. In fact, we have a number of folks we're dealing with right now, federal systems integrators on the DoD side that are really seeing the value here, and CMMC is a strong play for us. And we encourage folks to reach out and talk to us if they want to learn more.
Yeah, and I think currently, with the current situation with so many people working from home, I think the whole network performance and the accessibility issue is of particular importance, just in terms of performance, but also in terms of the security of the networks as well. So it looks like we have covered most of the material that we want to cover. I think if there are any questions from the audience, we can probably take those now. As I said, I would have loved to have had this back in the day. I spent a lot of time wrestling with Visio, turning diagrams that were actually in paper into Visio diagrams, discussing data flows and device inventory. Oh, okay. With the, the system owners and the data owners. So, all right. Do we have any questions so far?
So Glenn comes in with a question, what is the licensing scheme? So it comes basically, it's very simplistic, comes in two flavors. We have a notion of node count, so your layer 2, layer 3 devices, we count those, and that's part of the licensing. The other component to licensing is the number of concurrent users. And if you wanted to get with us directly, Glenn, we'd be happy to go into more detail regarding the pricing for each. Matt, I'm going to let you answer this. We'll do it live. How well do our products work with F5 devices?
So the way that NetBrain is able to parse out these different configurations is we do what is actually called a parser. So we are able to break out the different variables within the configurations and specify exactly what we want to capture from those configurations, and then we translate those into these verifications. So you're specifying through these customized verifications that you want to see something exactly or not see that in the configuration, and so we're able to do that really with any any configuration. Including F5, which is one of our supported protocols or supported vendors. So, it's just a matter of creating the parser and then creating the rule that specifies, what you do or do not want to see, and then creating alert to alert you on that.
Thanks, Matt and Patrick. Both you and Glenn, thank you for your questions.
I appreciate everyone's attendance here, and especially the questions we got at the end. I hope this was helpful. I think the NetBrain's capabilities are great with regard to the things that I encountered and the issues that we discussed earlier, specifically the the data flows, the device inventory, and making sure that we can relate those, get that information to make sure that we're compliant with CMMC or other similar regimes, and with the goal of reducing really what Paul started off with, which is reduce your anxiety about the the unknown and the uncertainty of what's going on with this new requirement, which is currently in place for, or about to be officially in place for DoD contractors, and has the outside possibility of becoming something that's global for all companies that want to do business with the federal government. So I'd like to thank everybody for participating. I'd like to thank our panelists, and I'd like to thank our producer behind the scenes for making sure everything goes smoothly, even though I fumbled on the one question there. And I hope that everyone is healthy and safe, and that you can stay that way. I thank everyone.
Thank you.
We're done.